people off the roads, which I think is great, but we need that investment in public transport.
And a lot of that's down the track.
That's not in 30 years' time.
I actually liked yesterday's idea of removing cars from the CBD and forcing us to use shared transport. I think that's quite visionary. It at least deserves some proper exploration.
It's funny the two ideas came out on consecutive days. Transport expert Matt Lowry from greaterauckland.org.nz online joining us. Matt, good afternoon.
Hi, Jim.
The city's roads, I read the other day, gridlocked roads, it may have been even from you, I don't know, estimated to be wasting $3 billion a year in traffic congestion. So would congestion charging make a big dent? How would it work, Matt, please?
Well, the idea that they're talking about is that you would be charged, everyone would have a GPS device in your car, and you'd be charged based on where you drove and when you drove. So it's a bit different from what's been implemented in places like London and Stockholm, where you have a cordon where you pass a barrier, effectively, a virtual barrier, and you get charged for it. This would be much more wide ranging and covering the whole city, not just a certain area.
To what extent, if any, will this be a revenue stream for Auckland? Because, of course, we know about the big transport shortfall in Auckland right now. Or will it just get the traffic, the numbers of vehicles down?
Well, the actual wording of this project is that it's not to raise more revenue. It's to be revenue neutral. So it would replace fuel taxes and road user charges that the diesel vehicles pay. And there are possibly some issues with that because, as you say, we've got all this money that we do need to raise to build a whole lot more stuff. And there's also issues around, does that mean Auckland's paying less for fuel than the rest of the country? And how do we deal with that and address those issues?
Yes, that's the glaring contradiction that you've spied in what has been announced, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So the government opposed a regional fuel tax in Auckland because they didn't want fuel prices to be different in one region and not the other, but then they're now suggesting that it has to be different in Auckland to the rest of the country because they want to introduce the road pricing, which they should do. They should introduce it, but it seems a bit of a contradiction there.
Yesterday, and Paul has referred to this, it was announced congestion in Auckland could be addressed with cab-sharing minibuses having a free run in the middle of town, shared mobility. Do you think that's workable?
Well, we already have that in effect with we have a lot of buses and we have trains and ferries coming to the city. We're always going to need some level of vehicles in the city, whether it be deliveries, whether it be people who can't use those, particularly those with disabilities, people who are travelling off-peak that aren't necessarily causing huge amounts of congestion. The roads are often quite free then. The issue is generally at the peak times and giving people alternatives to get around. And so, yes, we need to have better alternatives, and so that not everyone has to drive to the city, and a lot of people don't already. But we need to have those alternatives in place so that they're there and available.
As our panellists are saying, though, yeah, right. I mean, we need to have a whole set of transport proposals for people that are just as efficient as their own present private plans, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't expect... people are rational at the end of the day, and they'll make rational decisions, and so you have to have... public transport works well. Where it works well, like on the Northern Busway and the rail lines, those are the services that are growing rapidly with usage, and people are responding to that. So people will use it where it works well. We just have to make sure that we're building stuff that works well.
Lovely, Matt. Thank you. Matt Lowry from Greater Auckland Online. Paula Penfold, thank you for coming to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And bon voyage, Penny Ashton.
Thank you very much.
We hope you have a tremendous trip.
Chills. It'll be hard to get back to Mount Eden now. Traffic.
Checkpoint coming up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, the iconic Bluff oyster industry does appear to be under serious threat. Also tonight, 3 investigations are underway after Auckland prison staff were caught using excessive force against inmates. Team New Zealand boat builders working through the night as we speak, but should they have been racing in that wild weather at all? New Plymouth asks, $29 million too much for an airport upgrade? The Lions prepare for the Blues. A Dunedin man's $20 million plan to keep what was Canterbury in some form or other in Dunedin. And MSD and the privacy of your data. All of that and more coming up after the news at 5.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The Corrections Department has called in an inspector to investigate what's described as potentially excessive force by staff at Auckland Prison after an assault last month. A prison staff member was briefly hospitalised after an attack by 3 inmates using makeshift weapons. The inmates were also injured, with 2 going to hospital. Carla Penman reports.
The Auckland Prison Director, Andy Langley, says after reviewing CCTV footage, he immediately called in the police because of the use of force by staff. He says 2 prison officers have since been suspended and another is still to be dealt with. Mr Langley says management of the wing where it happened has also been changed. The inspector will speak to the inmates involved and to their families. A full operational review of the prison is also underway. In Auckland, ko Carla Penman tēnei.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand will consider any request from the country's Five Eyes spy network partners to put more focus on intercepting social media and encrypted technologies. The British Prime Minister Theresa May and the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull have both called for a crackdown on internet services following recent terror attacks in their respective countries, saying there's too much extremist material online. Australia says its top priority at the next Five Eyes meeting this month will be to get companies like Facebook and Google to hand over their customers' information. Bill English says the government will consider that at the time.
I think it's important to keep it in context though. The underlying threat from terrorism comes from radicalisation, and the communications are just one tool for people who might want to wreak havoc. But look, if they raise it, we'd consider it.
The countries in the Five Eyes spy network are the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia and New Zealand. The Labour Party says it's high time guidelines be put in place surrounding firearms in schools. The government has directed officials to draw up some rules after the military took guns onto Whakarongo School near Palmerston North during a leadership program. Students aged 9 to 12 were allowed to hold unloaded rifles and practice taking them apart during a presentation on gun safety. Labour's education spokesperson Chris Hipkins says schools should be gun-free zones.
I don't think that semi-automatic weapons should be in schools, full stop. And while I think the Army had good motivations and good intentions with what they were trying to do, it was entirely the wrong way to capture kids' imagination.
Chris Hipkins says there may be some exceptions for secondary schools with rifle shooting clubs. The Building Minister, Nick Smith, says it's crucial that when companies make claims about products like steel, that they're true. The stock market listed company, Steel and Tube, faces 29 charges of making false and misleading statements about seismic steel mesh in the 4 years up to 2016. 2 smaller mesh suppliers have pleaded guilty to similar charges and will be sentenced in August. The Commerce Commission is poised to lay charges against a 4th company and is still investigating a 5th. Dr Smith backs the Commission's actions.
It is crucial across our building regulation that where claims are made about the performance of products and their certification, that is true and correct.
Steel and Tube says it continues to stand by its products. Fans heading to tonight's clash between the Blues and the British and Irish Lions in Auckland are being urged to get to Eden Park early. Auckland Transport is putting on extra buses and trains for the match, but it's warning there could be delays. Kick-off for tonight's match is just after 7:30 and gates open 2 hours before that, coinciding with the evening rush hour. James Ireland from Auckland Transport says people should consider catching an early train.
Of course, it being in Kingsland, there's lots of fantastic places to eat and grab a drink first. So with the ticket comes free travel on event buses and on trains. So you can just jump on a Western Line train, and from within 3 hours before kick-off, you can just go straight to Kingsland, jump off there, grab a bite to eat, then head into the game.
James Ireland says there could be some delays on the roads and on public transport for those heading home from work. It's 5:15. In sport, it remains unclear if Team New Zealand will have its boat repaired in time for racing at the America's Cup tomorrow. The catamaran suffered significant damage after capsizing while racing Great Britain this morning. Helmsman Peter Burling says the shore crew will have a long night of repairs ahead of them.
It was obviously a pretty long day, and I'm sure it'll carry on for a while yet. And for ourselves, we'll be heading back and obviously checking in with the guys. Hopefully they'll have a pretty good idea of how much damage we do have. But at some stage we'll be back out there. Not sure whether we'll be making it tomorrow yet.
Team New Zealand lead the best-of-9 semi-final series 3-1. There could be a number of Lions looking to their New Zealand-born back Jared Payne to lead the way in their game against the Blues tonight. Payne has been named at centre for the Lions' first clash against Super Rugby opposition, forming an all-Ireland midfield with Robbie Henshaw. Payne played for the Blues in 2011 and Lions coach Warren Gatland hopes the 31-year-old will provide a calming influence for his side.
One of the reasons that Jared Payne was picked on this tour was because of his experience in New Zealand, and obviously been involved with the Blues, and he's played in a lot of big games where Ireland have won, and he's been one of the key components of their success.
Warren Gatland. And the Wellington Phoenix have appointed Daria Kalazic as their new coach. Kalazic has spent most of his coaching career in the Netherlands. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a pragmatic plan to end homelessness within 10 years. We'll talk to Nan Roman, President and CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, to find out more. News from Canada tonight when we check in with Peggy Revel, our correspondent in Canada. Canada's Federal Conservative Party has voted in a new leader to take on Justin Trudeau in the next federal election. Can he do it? Our window on the world has the BBC's Emily Thomas trying to find out when old food really becomes bad for you. And there's more tonight on Nights with me, Paul Brennan, and for Brian Crump after 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers clearing Waikato and Coromandel this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty in Taupo, fine. Waitomo to Kapiti, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Mostly fine, isolated showers possible about Whanganui and Taranaki. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine and cloudy periods. A few showers mainly about the coast. Waiata Upper, mostly cloudy with scattered showers clearing inland tomorrow. Wellington, cloudy periods and possibly the odd shower. Marlborough, apart from the Kaikoura Coast, also Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury and North Otago, fine and cloudy periods with the odd shower possible this afternoon or evening. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Cloud and showers retreating to Fiordland and coastal Southland tomorrow, and periods of rain for the Chatham Islands. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. Coming up on the program tonight, MSD and data security, high seas, high stakes and high risk at the America's Cup, allegations of excessive force in prison, Cadbury and Dunedin, the Lions and the Blues, and New Plymouth and its airport. But we begin tonight as far south as we can go on the mainland, Bluff, and in the wild strait beyond it, and Stewart Island beyond that. It's there the famous Bluff oysters come from, a delicacy to those who can afford them, and industry, jobs and economic lifeblood for those who fish the world famous resource. And now they are under threat from a parasite that's been found at Stewart Island, although the Ministry for Primary Industries is being cautious around threat assessment, as we'll hear. But the potential scale of the impact can be suggested by previous contaminations of a related parasite. At the beginning of this century, it wiped out almost the area's total stock, well in excess of 1 billion oysters. Last night, as we heard on Checkpoint, a meeting was held in Bluff of those who fish the oysters and those who support the industry. Today, MPI's Response Governance Group met to discuss how to protect the FOVO Strait fisheries from the parasite very nearby. I asked Jeff Gwynn, MPI's Readiness and Response Director, where they know the parasite is.
We have had 2 positive tests within Big Glory Bay in Stewart Island.
Okay, and they're farmed oysters, aren't they?
That's correct.
Do you believe the parasite is in FOVO Strait?
No, we don't, based on the testing we conducted in February.
So the critical thing, and this is what we were discussing with Bluff oyster fishers last night, is to get the parasite out of Stewart Island before it gets into FOVO Strait, isn't it?
It's about controlling the spread of the disease, and there's a number of options that you can do to achieve that.
And what are they?
I think the obvious options are around continuing with our current approach, which is the controlled area notice and the permitting and the surveillance and testing. There is an option, obviously, around removing the disease itself in terms of the farms, and there's a combination of those options.
Okay, can we talk about removing the disease itself? What you actually mean is just pulling up the oysters, don't you?
That is an option under consideration.
Okay, and what are the farmers saying about that?
Well, at this stage, any decision we make will be based on science, and we will be talking to those affected stakeholders prior to making any public announcement of any decision we make.
Is there a possibility that the oysters on these two farms where the parasites have been found will be lifted, will be just taken out of the sea?
There is that possibility. That is one of the options under consideration.
And the other option involves permitting and all that kind of stuff. I just wonder, could you explain geographically how close the Stewart Island farms are to the Foveaux Strait wild stock?
I wouldn't be able to give you a nautical distance, but they are in close proximity.
Okay, and there are strong currents and strong waters through there, aren't there?
Yes, there are.
So there is a very real possibility that the parasite is just spread by the movement of water, isn't there?
That's highly likely.
That's highly likely?
Well, it is.
And if that happens, what happens to the Foveaux Strait, the famous wild Bluff oysters?
If the disease was to actually get into the wild population, it would have unknown consequences, but I'd suggest they would be serious.
Does this entail potentially the loss of the Foveaux Strait Bluff oyster stock?
Look, I think there's no such thing as a zero-risk game here. I think we need to look at what we have in front of us, and we do have 2 finds in Big Glory Bay, and we need to manage that. As I said, there's a number of options under consideration. We need to work with those affected stakeholders prior to making any public announcement.
When you say those affected stakeholders, you're talking about the farmers here?
And the fishers.
Well, the fishers, and we spoke to one last night who organised the meeting, just say, get those bloody oysters out of here.
They've been quite clear in their position, but like any situation, there's obviously a contrary view.
And what is the contrary view? And I'm not being disingenuous there. I just wonder if you have infected stock that you can remove in order to prevent the transmission to non-infected stock. What is the argument contrary to that?
The argument is that it won't transfer to the stock. The reality is we will be led by the science, and the science will give us a clear direction, which it already has at our governance meeting today. We will now work with those affected stakeholders prior to any public announcement.
That's Jeff Gwynn, who is MPI's Readiness and Response Director. Now, in breaking news, we can confirm that Sanford owns one of the infected oyster farms, Big Glory Bay, Stewart Island. Joining us now is Sanford's Chief Operations Officer, Greg Johansson. Thanks, Greg, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Are you there?
Yeah, good evening, John.
Good evening. We just heard Jeff talking about stakeholders. You're one of them, aren't you?
Correct.
And so have you been talking to MPI today?
We're keeping in touch with them and following all their instructions.
Okay, what are their instructions? I'm a bit confused about what they are.
Well, when the notice came out, it was immediate stop of all movements of shellfish and equipment associated with the shellfish business, and we've done that from day one, and we're waiting for further instructions.
Can you clarify when day one was?
Wednesday about 4 p.m. last week.
Okay, so what's today, Wednesday, isn't it? So a week ago, exactly a week ago.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the first you heard of the parasite on Stewart Island?
We had heard that there was an initial test had turned up a positive, which was going for a second test. I think they have to do a second backup test to confirm that's not a false positive. But the confirmation came through last Wednesday.
Okay, so this is catastrophic for you guys, isn't it?
Well, we're the second largest shareholder, a quota owner in the wild oyster fishery, so we're obviously very concerned that we don't do anything that might endanger that stock.
Okay, now forgive my total ignorance. So you farm at Stewart Island and you have quota in Foveaux Strait?
We have both, yeah. We have a joint venture farming, just a start-up operation in Stewart Island, and we're a major quota owner in the wild fishery as well in Foveaux Strait.
Okay, so how is it best to protect the wild fishery in Foveaux Strait, do you think?
Well, we're waiting for direction from the science. I mean, we're under instructions not to touch anything, not to move anything until further instructions. So we don't want to make the situation worse by taking an action or an inaction which may endanger the wild species.
And if MPI come back to you and say, hey, look, we're terribly sorry about this, but lift those oysters up in Big Glory Bay, you farmed oysters, you would be prepared to do that?
immediately or under their protocol, and we need clear directions too about how to handle them. What do we do with them? How do we dispose them, etc.
Okay, but immediately is the key answer. So you would absolutely be prepared to do that under the rules of governance that MPI would give you?
Correct, no problem.
What's the extent of your financial exposure should that happen? Are you insured against such incidents?
We're not insured against the crop and the water. I think there might be some compensation provisions under the biosecurity regulations for this, but I don't know for sure. It's not a huge business for us at this stage. It's very much a start-up business. Obviously, it has huge potential for the future, but right now it's a start-up business.
I'm just coming to grips, and I suspect lots of North Islanders are, and I apologise to people in the south, but Big Glory Bay, if I remember correctly, is on the northeast side of Stewart Island, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and Fovo Strait. So Fovo Strait comes through from the southwest, running towards Big Glory Bay, doesn't it?
Well, it runs across the top, in between the island and the mainland. So yeah, there's a lot of current running through there. It's a pretty rough bit of water.
Okay, so there is a real risk, isn't there, of the parasite spreading?
Well, the issue is we don't know where the parasite is today. It's been found in 2 locations. We're not sure how it got there or where else it may be. Obviously, there's testing continuing, and we'll wait for further results in due course.
Okay. Now, I'm not implicitly casting any aspersions here, and I'm not asking you a question that hints that I believe something. This is an informational interview, but the same parasite's been found in Marlborough, right? And where did your oyster stock come from?
Well, our spat came out of the wild fishery in Fovo Strait itself.
Okay, so it's not been imported from Marlborough, you don't think?
To the best of our knowledge, no. There was a prohibition notice put in place back in 2015 when it was found up there. So.
Okay, and there's been no. Okay, absolutely. So you're clear on that. What happens now? I mean, what do you guys need, both as a farmer in Stewart Island, and more importantly, I think, and forgive me for being glib about that as a wild fisher in Fovo Strait, what do you need from MPI, and how quickly do you need it?
Well, we just need a clear and precise process to go through from here, so that we do the right thing. The worst thing would be to do, and by way of a clean-up, actually make the situation worse. So we are waiting for guidance, we are waiting for instructions, and we will follow them when we receive them.
Greg Johansson, who's Sanford's Chief Operations Officer, thanks so much for joining us, Greg. We really appreciate your time. We're going to go now to Jeff Walker, who is also a marine farmer on Stewart Island. He's one of 6 oyster farmers in Glory Bay. Jeff's been farming oysters since 2000, I think, and freighting marine stock since 1987. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I'm there, John.
Have you been listening to all of this?
I have.
Okay, well, it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you. What have MPI said to you?
Well, until I attended the public meeting yesterday, I was totally unaware. They haven't communicated with me at all.
Okay. Now, do you farm oysters?
Yes, I varied my permits in 1999, so I've been farming oysters on my site since 1999-2000.
Right, and you haven't heard from MPI?
No, I wrote to them today expressing concern that I hadn't heard from them because not only am I a marine farmer, but I'm also a director of a company that's been servicing marine farms since 1986, and our vessel goes in and out of Big Glory Bay all the time, and no one's contacted me about that either.
So your vessel would go in and out of Big Glory Bay and through Fovo Strait, wouldn't it?
Yes, it does.
Where the wild stock is.
And that's one of the issues that you need to understand, that Sanford's also harvest a whole lot of salmon, and they're doing that now. And my understanding of their vessel is that it sucks water into its cooling system from the sea, and then obviously it circulates it round to cool the engine, and then it pumps it back out again. Now, if that understanding is correct, our vessel doesn't do that, by the way. If that is correct, then there's an ongoing risk right now with the stuff if the stuff's in the water and gets sucked into that engine, it could conceivably be pumped out into the strait. So I think your last speaker was right in that we need to be really careful about how the stock is lifted out of the water. There's no question in my mind from the scientist at the meeting last night that the stock's got to be pulled out before it dies, and that increases the risk dramatically. But the actual taking out of the oysters is going to be quite problematic, because you're going to need to have controls right at the farm in the vessel that it takes them away, and then you've got to actually be careful about how you get them onto land and then dispose of them to make sure that nothing drips back into the water, as it were.
Gosh, there's so much to discuss, isn't there? The first point is that the parasite goes looking for a new host when the oyster dies, right? So they have to be removed before the oyster dies. The second point is that we were talking about restrictions and movement around oyster farms, but we weren't talking about restrictions of movement in terms of salmon farms. Now, you're saying that there are boats doing work that is sucking water in and spitting water out on salmon farms which are nearby to the contaminated oyster farms?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
When has that most recently been taking place?
At the meeting last night, one of the speakers said that he'd been talking to the local operations manager for Sanford's, about not going across to harvest salmon today. Whether that happened or I don't know, but certainly there's been harvesting of salmon from the bay subsequent to this disclosure, which I now understand was last week.
So are you surprised by that?
Yes, I am, and I'm astounded, really. And I think some of the fishermen at the meeting last night were astounded too, because one of the fishermen who I gather you might be talking to, Willie, called.
Yeah, we spoke to Willie last night, and we're going to speak to him after 6 tonight.
Well, he's actually, and we've done this in the past too. We've transported. We used to do work for Sanford's, and they put the fish into big dough labs on the deck, and there's always in a rough sea, there's always fluid coming out and going over the side. So. And they pump water into the ice slurry at the farm when they put the fish in. So you see the easy story. Not only is the stuff perhaps going into their cooling system, but it's also being sucked up and put with ice. And then the fish are put in there, and it's all taken across the strait. And on a rough day, there'll be slopping and stuff going over the side. And so. We don't know. We don't understand how big a risk that is, but at the moment, this is a monumentous event for us, and we think that everybody should be just taking it really, really carefully, because I think with the guy who spoke last night said this is the last wild fishery in the world, and that the other wild ones have been wiped out by the parasite we're talking about.
Jeff Walker, who was joining us live from Stewart Island, where he is both a marine farmer and also, as you heard, involved in the transport business of marine stock, joining us live on the phone there. This is very much unfolding this evening, and if there is any more to update you on, we will most certainly do that. It's 23 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Let's stay on the water, although a long way from Fovo Strait. Team New Zealand's boat builders are working desperately through the night in Bermuda, repairing their damaged catamaran after a dramatic day and wild conditions on the water. In a day of high drama, the team had to change a wing shortly before winning its first race against BAR, but nosedived and capsized at the start of the second race. Some crew members were flung into the water, others were left hanging upside down, clinging to the boat, all of that kind of stuff. America's Cup commentator Peter Lester has since said the race should have been abandoned and the safety of all teams was at risk in the high winds and choppy seas. In a moment, we'll hear from our reporter Todd Nile, who's in Bermuda, of course, for his take on it. But first, Team New Zealand has admitted the capsize was the team's own fault. Here's helmsman Peter Burling after the race.
Yeah, well, firstly, sorry to keep all of you waiting. We kind of realised we're a little bit late, but we're actually just trying to get the boat in. And obviously, we've sustained quite a bit of damage. But I think, the firstly and the most important thing for us is that all the guys on board are safe and with no major injuries. So it's definitely a relief when you're seeing a few of them falling off, that you can, see them, your heads above water, and that they're all fine. And right now the guys are obviously taking the boat out and assessing the damage, which we have quite a bit. But we feel like we'll be able to repair it and get back into action.
It's Peter Burling, our reporter Todd Niall watched it all unfold in Bermuda. Not only was there the capsize, but he told me via Skype video it was an achievement getting Team New Zealand on the water at all this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it was a day where you kept seeing things happening and you were going, no, that can't be right. I saw the boat go off. A short time later, I looked out the window again and the boat was back, and you're going, hang on a minute, racing starts in 15 minutes. What's going on here? And then, so I rushed down there. It's only 50 metres from the media centre, and watched this extraordinary performance as they lifted the boat out of the water, got the old wing off, got the new wing on. And, everyone watching was quite anxious because these wings, when they catch the wind, there was every hand on deck on ropes trying to steady this thing as they lifted it off the boat. So they have to lift the wing up, then they have to trundle the boat away from underneath it, and then they've got to get the wing down on its own trolley and away and get a new wing out, and all in this incredible wind, and there's guys rushing around holding, it's like a vertical tug of war with this wing to keep it in place while the replacement work is going on. Families standing around, really anxious, a couple of teenage sisters of one of the crew, almost inconsolable watching this work go on because they understood, the disaster that it could be if they didn't get back out to the racetrack, not knowing what the real disaster was going to be later in the afternoon.
Which is incredible. So they get it out, they win the first race, they capsize in the second race. And what was it like being there as that was going on?
Well, I went back down to the Team New Zealand base, after that capsize where the family, were grouping and waiting for the boat to come back in. And it was a long wait because the boat was so, the wing was badly damaged. And so they had to be careful how they moved it. And, you could go and watch out in the distance, out on Great Sound with this dark, broody sky, this lone boat coming slowly back into the base, and almost teary family members who were relieved that nobody was hurt, but understanding, without knowing what the damage was, what this meant for the team, the scale of the work that is going on now as we speak and through the night to try and get the boat ready.
Do you think they'll be able to get the boat ready? I know it's almost too soon to say, but what's your sense from the camp?
That the boat, as I was told, can be ready tomorrow if racing is on tomorrow, but that itself is also a question because the forecast is looking even worse than today, and today was the biggest wind that they've ever raced in here.
Yes, and the question, I guess, is should they have raced today? There is now a growing school of opinion that they shouldn't have been out on the water.
Well, according to the rules, they should have raced. The only restraint is what happens in the minutes between 8 minutes before and 3 minutes before the start gun. If it's over 24 knots in that period, then the start is deferred. If during that 5-minute window the wind is stable and consistently below 24 knots as it was, the race can start. Once the race is started, really there are only significant safety concerns that allow the organisers to call it off. And remember also that there is pressure on the schedule to get this through because this is all dictated by a TV schedule. The Challenger final starts at the weekend, and if this competition is not completed, then it gets cut short, and the results are determined by whichever races are completed. So imagine the uproar if there was an incomplete competition, some weird thing happened which could do, and everyone's going, well, what about that day? Why didn't you race then?
Todd Niall from Bermuda. 3 investigations are underway after Auckland prison staff were caught on CCTV footage allegedly using excessive force against inmates. Last month, a prison staff member was treated in hospital for stab wounds after an attack by 3 inmates using makeshift weapons. The inmates were also injured, with 2 going to hospital. The police are investigating while Corrections is both carrying out an internal review and has also called in an inspector. The Corrections Northern Regional Commissioner, Jeanette Burns, spoke to our reporter Carla Penman about what was caught on CCTV.
It's actually been referred through to the police, so I do not really want to go into too much detail in and around that. But what I do want to say is that it was picked up as part of a regular review. Any use of force that's used in a prison is always reviewed, which means, looking at CCTV footage, looking at reports, to make sure that all our processes are followed correctly.
But it would have had to have been fairly concerning to be calling in an inspectorate, right?
Well, the prison director, who actually did the initial review, was sufficiently worried about some of the injuries that were sustained, that he referred it to police, and now that it's become, a police investigation. And then we also would want our inspectorate as a third party to come in and have a look at that for us as well.
So what will the inspectorate be doing?
Well, the inspectorate will come in and review footage, talk to prisoners, talk to corrections officers, and just do a thorough review of the situation and what led up, what events led up to that incident and what happened afterwards. That would be normal process in any serious incident.
Consequences have been dished out for some of the staff members involved, yes?
2 staff have been suspended pending the police investigation. So that is purely for everyone's safety whilst this is under police investigation.
That's the Corrections Northern Regional Commissioner Jeanette Burns speaking to our reporter Carla Penman. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ, a South Auckland councillor says the death of a teenager who fell into a drain over the weekend could have been avoided. A parliamentary committee looking into MSD and its data security. The Blues prepare for the Lions. Does the new Plymouth Airport terminal need a $29 million upgrade? And more. But before it all, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
3 investigations are underway at Auckland Prison after staff were caught on CCTV footage allegedly using excessive force against inmates. It followed an assault last month which led to a staff member and 2 inmates having hospital treatment. The police are investigating that incident, and Corrections is both carrying out an internal review and has also called in an inspector to look into the allegations of excessive force against inmates. The Social Development Ministry has been called negligent for failing to treat seriously an earlier security problem with the system that was to collect personal data from community agencies. The plan to collect that data has been put on hold because the IT system was found to be insecure after a near-miss data breach in April. The head of the ministry, Brendan Boyle, told MPs today that could have been prevented if the problem identified in January had been treated seriously enough. Labour's Carmel Sepuloni says that shows negligence by the ministry and the entire plan to collect people's data should be abandoned. The Prime Minister says New Zealand will consider any request from the country's Five Eyes Spies network partners to focus more on intercepting social media and encrypted technologies. The British Prime Minister Theresa May and the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull have both called for a crackdown on internet services following recent terror attacks, saying there's too much extremist material online. Australia says its top priority at this month's Five Eyes meeting will be to get companies like Facebook and Google to hand over their customers' information. Bill English says the government will consider it at the time. The Ministry of Education has been directed to draw up guidelines on the use of firearms in schools after the Defence Force took the guns into Whakarongo School near Palmerston North as a part of a leadership program in April. Students aged 9 to 12 were allowed to hold the unloaded rifles and practice taking them apart during a presentation on gun safety. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Jonathan Mitchell, who's beaming in from Wellington, where last night, Jonathan, you promised us manufacturing figures. So I'm just going to sit here and, as you stand, and deliver.
Oh, well, this is the final piece of the puzzle, John, for the first quarter of the year. This is the manufacturing volumes, as you say, for the 3 months to March. A slight fall if you look at the overall number compared with late last year, really dragged down by the primary sector, meat and dairy production volumes, offsetting a lift in petroleum, coal and chemicals production. But if you strip those primary sector numbers out of the equation and look at the core number, that actually rose 1.7%. 7 core sectors actually rose in the first few months of the year, but as we've been talking about, the economy looks to have just started 2017 on a slightly softer note. That was reflected when I was talking about those building volumes that came out yesterday, which were lower, dragged down by the commercial sector. That's only expected to be temporary though, but the official data, official numbers on first quarter economic growth come out next week. likely to show a growth rate of between 0.5 and 1%. As I say, those numbers come out next week, but that's the consensus forecast at the moment.
Thanks, Jonathan. So that's the first quarter picture. What does this mean in terms of jobs? And there's some figures around this, right, particularly in terms of job advertisements.
This is the ANZ Bank's monthly job ads index. It's had a fairly strong showing lately. The last few months, really strong right around the country, especially in a number of sectors. It did fall back a touch in the month of May, but the key fundamentals are still there. There's solid demand right around the country for workers. A number of sectors such as construction, manufacturing, services and tourism looking for new workers. They are highlighting, though, the difficulty in finding skilled workers, and wage pressures are probably going to be a key feature of this year. Wage growth, that's likely to happen over the next few months. That often lags the unemployment rate, which has fallen recently to below 5%, and that's expected to stay below 5% as well.
What happened to the markets today, Jonathan?
The top 50 index fell 27 points, finishes at 7,468. And the dollar, just looking a bit weaker this evening, 71.7 US cents and 95.1 Australian.
Our business reporter, Jonathan Mitchell from Wellington. Thank you very much indeed, Jono. Let's stay in Wellington. A parliamentary committee today heard the government officials did identify a security problem with a system that was going to collect personal data from the clients of community agencies, but didn't treat it seriously enough. Now, this was a controversial plan in which the Ministry of Social Development would collect client data from non-government agencies that were reliant on government funding. Criticised as excessive by the Privacy Commissioner at the time, the plan fell over not because of objections to it, but because of a near-miss data breach that led to the Minister and Tolley ordering a new system be designed. Today, the issues and risks around data security were examined by our parliamentary committee, and our political editor, Jane Patterson, was there.
What went wrong, how wrong was it, and when were key people told? In May, it cost MSD's Deputy Chief Executive his job. But prior to that, there was confusion about its seriousness and questions about whether it had been downplayed. Today, MSD Chief Executive Brendan Boyle told a parliamentary committee a security problem with the system was identified in January.
There was no data that was breached, so it wasn't considered to be of such a nature that it required that kind of escalation. There was a folder that there was confusion around the permissions.
But the Privacy Commissioner John Edwards told RNZ it wasn't only the near miss, which could have been worse than it was the fact the information was being collected at all. In other words, data security wasn't the only thing he was concerned about.
The security element was one, and it was a really significant one, and had potential to undermine trust in the system, and I think that potential was then realised. But our criticisms, our findings were actually more fundamental, that in fact we found the ministry had been unable to tell the story of why they wanted the information and how it would be used. And that meant that the NGOs, the non-governmental organisations, the community groups were not able to explain that to the people they were asking to give the information. So, we found that the legitimate government needs for information weren't matched to the different items of information.
Brendan Boyle admitted more action should have been taken when the near miss occurred.
Look, I accept that there was a risk that had been downplayed, and if it had been escalated, there's a possibility that the other issues may not have emerged.
But John Edwards told RNZ MSD was warned.
Well, our involvement in this began sort of mid-2016, and right from the very beginning, we told the ministry that it would be really important to have a kind of methodical end-to-end look at the system and do a privacy impact assessment, a security risk assessment of the whole process of collecting this information. We found that didn't happen, and that was, I think, quite a significant contributor to the failure, which ultimately ended that policy.
But Labour's Social Development spokesperson Carmel Sepuloni says the whole data collection plan should be abandoned, as the public can no longer have confidence in the ministry or the minister.
I think it was really negligent of Brendan Boyle to know about the breach in January and not to inform the Minister, because action should have been taken there. The public should have been alerted to the fact that their system was not safe in terms of protecting data.
But the Minister Anne Tolley told the committee some agencies already have the requirement to hand over client data in their government contracts.
They collect that data themselves. It's their names and addresses of their clients and the number of children that they have. So they will have that data already, but they keep that, and we will not be requiring that to be uploaded until we have this new system in place that everybody has confidence in.
Mrs Tolley says she expects the new system to be up and running by the end of the year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
20 to 6, the idea of the public buying Dunedin's Cadbury factory to keep it going is gaining momentum, having raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in pledges. Already, the plan was launched this morning by City Councillor Jim O'Malley to raise $20 million to buy part of the Central City factory and keep producing Jaffas, pineapple lumps and so on in the city. The minimum investment is $50 a person. The factory's owner, Mondelez, plans to shut the factory next March and sell up at a cost of about 350 jobs. But our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer found Dr O'Malley's idea is striking a chord.
Today was a cold, grey day on Dunedin streets. But Jim O'Malley's Cadbury plan is a heart-warmer.
I think that's a great idea. It's like one of the icons of Dunedin. It's what makes Dunedin special, brings in some tourism, and also just saving jobs for people. So yeah, definitely I'd chip in $50 for that.
The Labour MP for Dunedin South, Claire Curran, who's been on the working group on the Cadbury closure, is enthusiastic too.
It's a new idea, it's a great idea, but, let's back it. I'm urging all Dunedin people or anyone who loves Dunedin to get behind it.
Ms Curran's Dunedin North colleague David Clark is backing it too, though he says it should be the government investing in the plan, not the public. The National Minister and List MP Michael Woodhouse did not return calls. And while Dunedin's Mayor Dave Cull won't officially endorse the plan, he says he might look at investing himself.
I thought good on him. He's giving it a go, and I applaud his efforts. I've said right from the start I support any plan that might retain continued processing and or jobs in the city. So give it a crack.
Mondelez has given Dr O'Malley a fortnight to gather non-binding financial pledges and get as close as he can to raising $10 million. The funds would be used to buy the factory's logistics building and equipment to produce the confectionery. Under the plan, the new company would employ 15 staff to run one shift producing Cadbury products and 10 support staff, though there'd be room in the future to expand. But his plan might come down to convincing big investors to back it. A former Otago stockbroker, Eon Edgar, says he'd have a look, and corporates are already coming out in support. The chief executive of Foodstuffs South Island, which runs the New World and Pack and Save supermarkets, Steve Anderson, says he's passionate about producing pineapple lumps and Jaffas locally.
Oh, it's a big shot, and we're right behind them. It's the little things like getting the products in boxes, getting it through the supply chain, getting barcodes in it. We're really good at that, and we can help anybody who wants to produce these products locally to get them on the shelves and available to New Zealanders.
But not everyone's backing it. The Otago Chamber of Commerce did not want to comment, and privately a few people poured scorn on the idea. Dr O'Malley will have to win over quite a few sceptics.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't touch it with the barge pole.
Why not?
Palm sugar.
Why not?
Years and years ago, Cadbury's were pulling out this, this deal with palm sugar they were using in their Cadbury's. I mean, I think they're full stop. Whittaker's all the way, mate.
Probably not, because they don't eat a lot of chocolate. But hey, it's pretty good for the town, I'd say.
I just don't think that. I think people are too complacent, apathetic, too apathetic. I just don't think they will get enough money to get it started.
But Dr O'Malley says he's been run off his feet with interest, and pledges for at least $300,000 were made by lunchtime. Iot Deporti, more Checkpoint, ko Ian Telfer, Tēnei.
A South Auckland councillor who says the death of a teenager who fell into a drain is unacceptable and that it could have been avoided. Manukau Ward Councillor Efessel Collins says the Mangere o Tahuhu local board had previously raised the issue of missing drain lids with Auckland Council. Violet Tupo, who was 17, is suspected to have drowned after trying to retrieve a ball from a drain in Mangere on Saturday. Our reporter Jessie Chang has more.
Flowers surround the drain, which lies only metres away from Violet Tupou's home. Visitors coming in and out of her house to pay respects to the grieving family say they aren't ready to speak to media. The police were called to Favona at 20 to 5 on Saturday afternoon, following reports of a woman down a drain. When they arrived, Violet was dead. The police say it's a tragic accident and have referred Violet's death to the coroner. But a support worker, CJ Fa'alanu, worked with Violet at Sir Keith Park School in Mangere and had known Violet since she was 5 years old. He says he's extremely shocked this has happened because Violet was a bright girl despite being autistic.
Just because she's got side effects to her sickness and stuff, I don't think people should be like, oh, that's probably why, because she's slow and stuff. No, she's a well-maintained young woman.
Local MP Aupito William Seo says the teenager was believed to have been playing with a ball and bat with other children, and they suspect the ball went down the drain.
Violet is a strong young girl, was able to lift that. She was seen diving head first into the drain to try and retrieve that ball. It was just virtually impossible for some of the younger children to hold on to her legs. But this is all suspicion, just from what people were saying.
Aupito William Seo says by the time the children sought help from adults, it was too late. Auckland Council is now reviewing the management of its drains, and the council's Director of Infrastructure and Environmental Services, Barry Potter, says technical experts are now working on the scope of the review. Manukau Ward Councillor Efeso Collins says the Mangere Otahuhu Board had raised concerns about missing drain lids to the council in the past. He says this should have been a warning sign that something needed to be done.
This is an avoidable tragic accident. It should not have happened in the first place, and it's unacceptable that it's happened at this stage for this young person's life. And so we as a council need to stand up, and someone's got to take responsibility and say, look, we're going to make sure that this isn't going to happen again, and let's make sure that every possible aspect of safety is looked at so that it does not happen again.
Violet will be farewelled at Mangarongo Marae near Whangarei tomorrow. For Checkpoint, ko Jessie Chang, tēnei.
A plan to increase the number of social and affordable homes in Wellington is receiving the thumbs up from both developers and the community housing sector. Wellington City Council wants to enter into partnerships with developers and community housing providers to redevelop unused inner city buildings and office space into new social and affordable apartments. The announcement was made at the Community Housing Association's annual conference in the capital, and Marie May has the story.
Wellington Mayor Justin Lester says housing is the biggest issue facing the city right now and bold action is needed to tackle it. He says some developers have already retrofitted buildings to provide hotel space or student accommodation, and the new plan will see that approach widened out to provide affordable rental housing. Justin Lester says the plan has benefits for everyone involved in the housing market.
We don't have to borrow as such. The building owners, so the private housing provider, do that. They'd refurbish the spaces. They'd take on that risk of the construction, but we'd provide them with a long-term lease. And we can provide also access to subsidised rentals through the income-related rents by working with community housing providers.
Scott Figgenshow, who heads community housing Aotearoa, believes the council's plan is a fantastic step forward in remedying the lack of affordable homes in the capital.
The role the council can play in both backing some building conversions that may also need to do seismic upgrades, allow community housing providers to do tenancy management and actually operate the housing, and then wrap all that up in a way that makes a really bankable proposition.
A Wellington developer, Alex Castle, says the inclusion of a 15-year lease to the council will encourage developers to get involved in the project.
There's quite a bit of work to do, and there's a bit of investment required in terms of actually making some of these buildings work, but a 15-year lease, I think, will attract people because I think the incentive would be there, the risk and reward would stack up.
The Wellington Chamber of Commerce Chief John Milford says the council's plan should not reduce the amount of office space available in the capital. He says A-grade space will always be a premium for office rental, as will B-grade space, but there is plenty of other property which would be suitable for the new initiative.
But we also have C-grade space. That is the potential for alternative use of that space. It's not a bad thing to put pressure on office space if it means, again, you get more A-grade space built on the other side for the commercial environment.
Scott Figgenshow from Community Housing Aotearoa says the mix of households in the new developments should prevent them becoming ghettos.
Maybe they're paying a market rent. Others might have purchased their unit. Other folks might, under a shared ownership program, own 60% of the unit, and someone else is a social rental tenant assisted with income-related rent subsidy or accommodation supplements. And, that's what good neighbourhoods and good communities are all about.
Justin Lester says the council will be seeking proposals for the new housing model later in the year. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Some sport now. The British and Irish Lions are back in Auckland to face the Blues, the Super Rugby team, in their second match of their New Zealand series tonight. After almost being upset by the provincial Barbarians, a side of amateur and semi-professional rugby players in Whangarei on Saturday night, the Lions will be hoping to prove a few New Zealand fans wrong when they face their first Super Rugby side at Eden Park. It'll be a tough task, though, given Coach Warren Gatland has rolled out a completely new starting lineup for the match, while the Blues are nearing the end of their Super Rugby season together. Our reporter Matt Chatterton is at Eden Park. Hi Matt, what are you expecting tonight?
Hi John, I'm expecting another tough match for the Lions. Of course, you mentioned this is their first Super Rugby franchise they're facing. We saw how they handled the provincial Barbarians, a bit scratchy in Whangarei on Saturday night. They've rolled out a whole new team. I mean, they bought out 41 players so they can afford to roll out a whole new team to get them used to playing here in New Zealand. So it'll be interesting to see how they gel so quickly and how they get their lines and all those things right in the game. And I think given the Blues have been playing together for a whole season now, 6 months, they will be a slick operator tonight for the Lions.
It's going to be a cracker of a game. Patrick Tuipolotu, who is a really talented young lock, left out of the Blues, Matt.
Yes, he was left out for reasons because he did turn up to training on Monday late without letting any of the Blues management know that he would be turning up late. A big call to make given the significance of this game, but Coach Tana Umanga has a particular culture in this franchise, and he is sticking to his guns and showing the younger players that that sort of behaviour won't be tolerated.
2 test matches at Eden Park, Matty, both of them sold out months ago. How many are expected for the Blues game tonight?
I believe it's going to be near to a sellout again tonight. Wow. And I can just give a quick public service announcement to anyone that is coming down here to get down here early and have plenty of time available, as I even got caught in traffic getting here. So yeah, it's going to be a packed house, I believe, here at Eden Park.
Matt Chatterton live from Eden Park, where the Blues are taking on the Lions. That'll be a fantastic game. Lots of conjecture about how good the Lions are. It's entirely possible, of course, that they were jet-lagged and not that amped when they were playing the provincial Barbarians, a team that they were expected to comfortably beat. Tonight is a game that you would certainly expect them to step up for. Did I just use the phrase step up? Sorry. Does the new Plymouth Airport terminal need a $20 million upgrade? That's the question being asked by $29 million upgrade. That's the question being asked by a former councillor who says a plan to revamp and double the size of the current terminal is in danger of becoming a vanity project that will end up costing Taranaki ratepayers millions. Now, Len Howard says the original $9 million design, so $20 million less, was fit for purpose. And as our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin reports, he ain't alone in saying that.
Last year, the District Council rejected a functional airport terminal design in favour of an iconic upgrade which is twice the size and incorporates a cultural narrative. It says the refurbished terminal, costing between $21.7 million and $28.7 million, will provide a gateway to the 420,000 passengers who fly in and out of Taranaki each year. The council says increased airport revenues will pay for it at no additional cost to ratepayers. But Mr Howers, who quit the last council mid-term, told the annual plan meeting today the project has got out of hand and ultimately the community will pay for it in higher airfares and increased user charges.
The problem I have is the size of the terminal itself. You know, the argument that it needs a 4,000 square metre terminal rather than 2,000, which is actually fit for purpose, and I think that's the real problem. The evidence and the facts support the smaller case, not the largest case.
Mr Howard supports the idea of a cultural narrative, but says the council is fixated on the idea of the airport as a destination in itself.
I think the whole argument put forward by the officer, by the way, as well, that the airport itself is going to be a tourist attraction in its own right, I think actually just shows how far they've actually got caught up in the emotion of the topic rather than what actually is true.
Submitter Tony Collins wasn't a fan either.
We want to go to the airport, get on a plane, fly out, come back, off a plane, in our car and go home. I don't want to go shopping out there, and I don't think a lot of other people do. It's the last place I want to spend time.
James Finlayson owns a helicopter business based at the airport. He questioned the council's predictions for revenue and passenger growth.
Shelve the plans right now for the option that seems to be the favoured one, for a grand edifice, and go back to a practical, safe, functional building. Design something that allows for future expansion if and only if and when necessary. Don't be seduced by your eloquent reports, your predicted income and your assumptions.
Climate Justice Taranaki spokesperson Lyndon DeVenture added that he had pressing concerns about old oil well sites on the airport grounds.
We don't really want to think about it in many respects. It could be dreadful. There's the explosions that have happened overseas have caused fatalities. So we don't want that to be happening here, of course. So we would like the council to be more mindful of the risks that they are taking on board here.
Wayne Kappa, a member of the Pukitapu Hapu, which has been involved in designing the cultural aspects of the new building, supported the expanded terminal.
I think it would be great for us as a city and as a province to take that step as well, like Auckland Airport has, and be inclusive and share those stories of pre-European and post-European at the airport. I think that's important.
Thank you very much, Mr.
No facts or figures, just from the heart.
No, that's brilliant. We like that.
The New Plymouth Council has received more than 200 submissions on the airport project, the majority of them in favour of the proposal. It will make a final decision on the terminal when it meets on June the 27th to sign off its annual plan for the 2017-2018 year. In New Plymouth for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tene.
200 submissions on the proposal. Feel free to make submissions to Checkpoint via text 2101 or email us at checkpoint at radionz.co.nz if you are in Taranaki or use the New Plymouth Airport. Let's head south from Taranaki to the Kapiti Coast. An iconic 90-year-old makarakapa hedge has been reduced to wood, in part anyway, after the Kapiti Coast District Council delivered on an ultimatum to its owner. Vince Osborne says he was in Wellington today when the council turned up to his Waikanae property to cut a corridor at the bottom of the hedge to provide a footpath after complaints from neighbours about safety. We don't think there was a footpath there to start with. Anyway, the council says it took action today because Mr Osborne was told to cut the hedge himself back in January and failed to do so. Mr Osborne disputes there were any safety issues and said the hedge was planted by his grandfather back in the 1930s and he, like the hedge, is gutted.
It's been sort of hacked at the bottom, so it's got a big slash through the bottom of dead sticks and wood and things. No arborist in sight, just a big tractor and chopped it through, yeah. So you've got this sort of big sticking sticks and mess and brown through the bottom of it, yeah.
And will it survive that?
Well, fingers crossed, we hope so. There's quite a lot of other hedge, depending on, I haven't seen, whether they're going to carry on and do more. I understand they were going to carry on and do more. I haven't seen that yet. So we're hoping that it will. It just looks bloody awful. Yeah.
Can you tell us about the objections to it? What were the concerns being expressed? It's difficult exactly to pin that down, but there was a sense that there was one area just beyond it. Was it a road or a driveway? A road, I think.
So, yeah, that's correct, John. It started off with a complaint from the neighbours who live in the adjacent road coming out onto the main road there, Timana Road. So it started off as they couldn't see the sight lines. But, of course, once that issue was proved to be incorrect, the council shifted on to other issues, which was no pedestrian access along that side of the road, which is the primary reason why they've done it. There's a couple of other minor ones which were resolved. So basically they're saying there was no footpath access along that side of the road because the hedge took up the whole berm. even though there's no footpath on that side of the road in any case, they had to chop it to create a theoretical footpath.
A theoretical footpath. What do you think your granddad would say about this? He planted it in the 30s, right?
Oh, he did, yeah, in the 30s. Yeah, no, look, he'd be pissed off like I am, and we all are. You know, it's just like living in a Hitler state, to be honest. So, you know, they just dictate what they think is correct and don't listen to anybody else, and they do what they want to do.
Vince Osborne talking to us from his home behind the hedge earlier this afternoon. Certainly the photos suggest that whatever you think of the rights or wrongs of the hedge being trimmed, they did a spectacularly ordinary job of the trimming process. By golly, don't let them cut your hair if you're in the neighbourhood. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. 3 investigations are underway after Auckland prison staff were caught on CCTV cameras using potentially excessive force against inmates. A prison officer was treated in hospital for stab wounds last month after an attack by 3 inmates using makeshift weapons. The inmates were also injured and 2 had to go to hospital. The Corrections Northern Regional Commissioner Jeanette Burns says the case has been taken very seriously.
The prison director, who actually did the initial review, was sufficiently worried about some of the injuries that were sustained that he referred it to police, and now that it's become a police investigation. And then we also would want our inspectorate as a third party to come in and have a look at that for us as well.
Jeanette Burns says a safer Auckland prison plan is also being pulled together to improve conditions for staff and inmates. The Social Development Ministry's been called negligent for failing to treat seriously an earlier security problem with the system that was to collect personal data from community agencies. The plan to collect that data has been put on hold because the IT system was not secure enough. The government ordered a redesign after a near-miss data breach in April. But the head of the ministry, Brendan Boyle, told MPs today it could have been prevented if the problem identified in January had been treated seriously enough. Labour's Carmel Sepuloni says the entire plan should be abandoned.
I think it was really negligent of Brendan Boyle to know about the breach in January and not to inform the Minister, because action should have been taken there. The public should have been alerted to the fact that their system was not safe in terms of protecting data.
Labour MP Carmel Sepuloni. Officials have been ordered to draw up guidelines around whether firearms should be allowed in schools. The government's directed the move after the Manawatu Standard published photos of school children wielding assault rifles. The Defence Force took the guns onto Whakarongo School near Palmerston North as part of a leadership program in April. Students aged 9 to 12 were allowed to hold the rifles and practice taking them apart. The Greens MP, Catherine Delahunty, says that's not okay.
Clearly it's not safe for primary school children to have an assault rifle in their hands. What is the educational value of teaching children how to use assault rifles? It's not acceptable. It's propaganda to persuade children that Defence Force is really cool and guns are really cool. Guns are not cool.
The Green Party MP, Catherine Delahunty. The Ministry for Primary Industries is considering pulling up thousands of oysters on Stewart Island to stop the spread of a lethal parasite. A meeting of 100 people from the Bluff oyster industry yesterday called for urgent action to contain the infection, which is again threatening their livelihoods. The ministry says staff met with the Bluff group last night. Jeff Gwynn from the ministry told Checkpoint it's decided what to do next, but he wouldn't give details.
We will be led by the science, and the science will give us a clear direction, which it already has at our governance meeting today. We will now work with those affected stakeholders prior to any public announcement.
Jeff Gwynn says it's highly likely the parasite will be spread to the Bluff fishery in Fovo Strait if left unchecked. The Health Ministry says new approaches are needed in mental health as well as increased funding. Jonathan Coleman made the comment in a heated exchange with other MPs at Parliament's Health Select Committee today. He said the latest government budget had boosted mental health spending by $224 million over 4 years. Dr Coleman said $100 million will be used to develop new ways to manage mental health patients, focusing on social investment.
It's not just a matter of money.
mental health needs a new approach. And as I said in my opening remarks, this is something that, people right across the Western world are being challenged by.
Jonathan Coleman. He said details of projects to be funded from the Social Investment Kitty will go to Cabinet soon. An immigration lawyer says it's ridiculous that changes to complaints procedures mean people will be able to dispute poor grammar, tasteless office decor and rudeness, but not mistakes made in processing their visas. Criticism of the Immigration New Zealand's complaints process prompted a review in 2014. But a director of the Association for Migration and Investment, Richard Small, says the department's response seems to be rolling back the scope of what people can complain about. He says an independent person needs to review disputes about visas. Immigration New Zealand says under a new centralised system, specific complaints with evidence about breaches will be investigated. It's 6:05. In sport, and the All Blacks lock, Patrick Tuipulotu has been dropped from the Blues squad to face the British and Irish Lions at Eden Park tonight. The Super Rugby franchise confirmed the 24-year-old's axing after he failed to notify the team he would be late for training earlier this week. Tuipulotu has been replaced on the bench by Jimmy Tupou. Team New Zealand's shore crew have a long night ahead of them trying to patch up the damage caused to the boat during today's capsize at the America's Cup. Helmsman Peter Burling says there has been significant damage and they face a sleepless night. Burling isn't sure if the boat would be repaired in time for tomorrow's racing. Team New Zealand leads Great Britain 3-1 in the best-of-9 Challenger semi-final series. The new Wellington Phoenix coach says he can promise there'll be plenty of hard work ahead for the A-League club, and that's what he's come to New Zealand to win trophies. Dutchman Daria Kalisic takes over as coach, and Australian Rado Vidicic will be his assistant. Kalisic says the Phoenix board wants a new vision for the club.
The board was not satisfied how was everything going in the last years. So want to create a good professional environment, want to create one unified atmosphere. We're going to eliminate grey areas. So all of these things are very familiar to me.
The new Phoenix coach, Daria Kalisic. That's the news.
Mayor Sadiq Khan remembers the victims of the London attacks.
London stands in defiance against this cowardly attack on our city, our people, our values and our way of life.
But he isn't immune from Twitter attacks from Donald Trump.
Regardless of who is in the White House, Republicans or Democrats, we have never seen a president of the United States behave like this towards the elected official in another country that has just undergone a serious terrorist attack.
Keeping you up to date, Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then, after 9, news as it happens. In-depth conversations with world-leading experts and the latest trends you need to know about. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers clearing Waikato and Coromandel this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine. Waitomo to Kapiti, including Taumaranui and Taihape, mostly fine. Isolated showers possible about Whanganui and Taranaki. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine and cloudy periods, a few showers, mainly about the coast. Wairarapa, mostly cloudy with scattered showers, clearing inland tomorrow. Wellington, cloudy periods and possibly the odd shower. Marlborough, apart from the Kaikoura coast, also Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine. Kaikoura coast, Canterbury and North Otago, fine and cloudy periods and the odd shower possible this afternoon or evening. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with a few showers, cloud and showers retreating to Fiordland and coastal Southland tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands periods of rain. It's 6:08, and you can tell that John's back because it's really noisy in the studio.
I just bashed my way into the studio.
Really did.
Kicked my chair, slammed the door. I'm like my own teenage son. Thanks, Katrina Batten. I really appreciate you putting up with the comings and goings.
You're listening to Checkpoint
On RNZ. Speaking of bashing and comings and goings, Team New Zealand boat builders are working through the night in Bermuda, trying desperately to get their damaged catamaran ready for racing tomorrow. In a day of high drama, the team had to change a wing shortly before winning its first race against BAR. That was a triumph, getting the boat on the water, but it nosedived and keeled over at the start of the second, fortunately without serious injury. But they were doing real speeds and the winds were strong. Our America's Cup reporter Todd Niall is in Bermuda.
Team New Zealand back at base shortly before the day's semi-final races were due to start. The shore crew raced to lift the boat out of the water, remove a wing damaged in 20-plus knot winds and replace it. Team members struggled on ropes to hold the giant wing steady in strong winds. The helmsman Peter Burling and tactician Blair Tuke up at the mast helping with the pit stop. Sir Ben Ainsley and his BAR crew out on the course, wondering whether the team would get back in time.
It was incredibly close. They made it, I'd say, with 2 or 3 minutes to spare. So good job on their side. Their shore team getting back to the base, replacing the damaged wing with the spare wing and getting out. And, you know, given that they hadn't had any practice time in the morning either, you'd have to take your hat off and say they did a good job in that race to get around the course.
Did you know what they'd gone back to do, and did you have a view on whether they would get back in time?
Yes, we were aware of the damage that they had to the wing. We had a team were monitoring their progress. We thought it was going to be touch and go whether they'd make the race or not.
Made it, they did, and won, sailing past BAR after first getting confident that the new wing was good. And then the real disaster. At high speed, Team New Zealand's boat lifted, then nosedived sharply and heeled over on its side, wing in the water and seriously damaged. Waiting in strong winds in the public area by the base, Heather Burling, mother of helmsman Peter.
He'll be gutted, but Peter just, you know, he'll be more focused now on what comes next, on getting the boat back on the water for tomorrow. Yeah, I think for the boat builders, if they knew that there wasn't racing tomorrow, then they could sit and spend a couple of days and do a really good job on this repair. But they're not going to know that. I mean, the forecast is that the main will not be racing tomorrow. But, you know, they have to do whatever repair they can tonight, and that's going to be really, really hard going. So Pete will know that he's putting a whole lot of people through a sleepless night.
Burling stayed with the boat and was late arriving at the media conference. I suggested to him he looked wrung out.
Oh, you know, it was obviously a pretty long day, and I'm sure it'll carry on for a while yet. And now for ourselves, you know, we'll be heading back and obviously checking in with the guys. Hopefully they'll have a pretty good idea of, you know, how much damage we do have. But, you know, at some stage we'll be back out there. Not sure whether we'll be making it tomorrow yet, but I think that's something that's full credit to the guys. That 1 point we did manage to get in the first race today will be pretty valuable in the days to come.
Going out to that one, did you think you were going to get there in time?
Yeah, well, obviously listening to the radio and checking on what the other race was doing that whole time through that period, and now something we took as long as we had, made sure, you know, the boat was as ready as it could be.
Higher winds forecast for tomorrow raise a question mark over racing, but Team New Zealand must be ready. It's understood the boat can be repaired overnight, with damage limited to parts that can be replaced and not structural. The team is 3-1 up on BAR, and in the other pairing, Dean Barker made hay while the wind blew, taking 2 wins over Artemis, which retired damaged in the first race and simply got beaten up and penalised in the second. Barker's SoftBank Team Japan also 3-1 up. Teams must keep winning. Should the semi-finals not be able to be completed, they'll be decided on the races held, and if there's a tie, the team with the most recent victory goes through to the final. In Bermuda, mo te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Niall tēnei.
Of course, these are the semi-finals. The final will determine who races Oracle for the America's Cup. 6:13. A possible congestion charge for Auckland is receiving a lukewarm response. Auckland Council is investigating the idea, but the government says the research will take time and a final decision on a charging system should not be expected for some years. The AA and Generation Zero say it's a step in the right direction, but it won't ease the frustration commuters are feeling right now. Joanna McKenzie reports.
Transport Minister Simon Bridges says officials will look at options like varying what road users pay at peak times and whether it could change the way people travel. He says it's not a plan to get extra money because any charge would replace existing taxes.
We would be in principle revenue neutral here. This isn't about revenue, it's actually about changing behaviour, and to the extent that there was more revenue from pricing, you'd see things like the petrol tax, the road user charges come down. That's how we envisage this going.
Leroy Beckett from Generation Zero says congestion charges can be effective, but only if there are good public transport alternatives.
It's a really good measure if you have good public transport, so people can choose not to pay road pricing, people can choose not to be in their cars. But if you don't have good public transport, if you aren't giving people other options, it's just unfair.
Mr Beckett says more money is needed to create options so people have different ways to travel if they leave their car at home.
What Auckland does need is increase in our transport funding. We think that the government should allow us to have a regional fuel tax that would allow us to raise enough money very simply, very quickly, so that we can invest in public transport that will solve congestion.
The AA's concern is that congestion charging is a long-term solution and people are stuck in gridlock now. Its spokesperson Barney Irvine says there are simple things that could be done immediately that would get Auckland moving more smoothly.
Traffic light phasing, lane configuration, variable median barriers. These are smaller projects, lower cost, but they have a big impact and they benefit people every day. While we're waiting for the big projects to be delivered, these are the sorts of things that we could really be advancing.
The first stage of the Smarter Transport Pricing project will look into pricing options and is expected to be finished by the end of the year. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Joanna Mackenzie-Aho.
The Health Minister came under attack at Parliament today over mental health services that Labour says are in crisis. Jonathan Coleman faced a barrage of questions and interruptions during a heated session at the Health Select Committee. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there and she filed this report.
Dr Coleman defended overall spending on health in the latest budget. He acknowledged mental health is a hot topic, with 72,000 more people using hospital services now compared to 8 years ago. But he said the National-led government had boosted mental health funding by $300 million over 9 years.
There's 150 more psychiatrists and 600 more mental health nurses in the system compared to 9 years ago.
Despite the high demand, he said those who need urgent care receive it.
Waiting times are coming down, but there's still more we need to do. But people who need to be seen urgently are being seen urgently, and that's the feedback we get right across the system.
Dr Coleman added that a $224 million funding boost over 4 years in the budget includes ring-fenced spending on mental health by district health boards and $100 million for innovative new approaches to mental health under a social investment approach. But what the latter sum will do is unclear, with the funding not yet allocated, sparking this from Labour's health spokesperson David Clark.
I'm wondering, in light of this growing crisis, why you as Minister did not have any new mental health money appropriated in response to what the public thinks is a growing crisis.
Dr Coleman responded that new initiatives are needed here and abroad and solutions shouldn't be rushed. Dr Clark was not satisfied, however.
I didn't get a direct answer to that question. It's the third time I've asked.
Yeah, I'll tell you the direct answer. The direct answer is this is a long-term issue.
The Health Ministry's Chief Advisor on Mental Health, John Crawshaw, told MPs a change of approach over mental health is needed.
Currently, if we continue as we are, we're driving people into our specialist services. To actually change that process, we actually have to start to look at reconfiguring our responses.
The Green Party's Julianne Genter demanded to know if the funding boost in the budget will go far enough.
Given that there's been a significant increase in demand, isn't it reasonable to suggest that we would need a significant increase in funding to make sure that the people who need the help are able to get it?
Well, there has been a significant increase.
But has it matched the increase in demand?
A critical report last week by the Auditor General highlighted pressure on acute hospital services and poor discharge planning. Dr Coleman dismissed the report today, saying it was a snapshot in time only and over a year ago. But Dr Clark challenged him to order a review into mental health anyway to alleviate the widespread concerns.
I'm wondering if you, Minister, would have any objection to having a review, or are you afraid of what might be found?
No, I'm not afraid of it. I just think it would not be the best use of your time, because we have got a very clear approach and plan.
Dr Coleman did, however, promise that details of likely new approaches to spending on mental health will go to Cabinet soon. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Coming up to 6:19. Should firearms be allowed in schools? Officials have been ordered to consider exactly that as they draw up guidelines on whether guns and rifles have any place in mainstream education. Now, the government directed the move after the Manawatu Standard newspaper published photos of schoolchildren wielding guns as part of an army initiative. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Children toting assault rifles outside a classroom, a school kid peering down a rifle scope. They're images not often seen in New Zealand, but these photos of Palmerston North schoolchildren were published in a regional newspaper in April, and they have MPs fired up.
Clearly it's not safe for primary school children to have an assault rifle in their hands. What is the educational value of teaching children how to use assault rifles? It's not acceptable.
That's the Greens MP, Catherine Delahunty. She's furious about an army initiative in which unloaded guns were taken into Whakaronga School near Palmerston North. Students between the age of 9 and 12 were allowed to hold the rifles and practice taking them apart.
It's propaganda to persuade children that Defence Force is really cool and guns are really cool. Guns are not cool.
The Army's intent was to teach children about leadership in weaponry, but Labour's education spokesperson Chris Hipkins says schools should be gun-free zones.
I don't think that semi-automatic weapons should be in schools, full stop. And while I think the Army had good motivations and good intentions with what they were trying to do, it was entirely the wrong way to capture kids' imagination.
The Education Minister, Nikki Kay, says both the Defence Force and Whakaronga School were acting within the law. However, she wants officials to draw up guidelines to make clear exactly what is and is not appropriate.
Look, I'm pretty conservative on this stuff. As a general rule, I don't support guns in schools.
But she says there may be some very rare exceptions.
For instance, we don't want a situation where the Armed Defenders Squad can't turn up to a school if there's a threat. And also, we've got an Olympic sport in terms of shooting, so there are some schools that are involved in that.
She's directed ministry officials to work with the School Trustees Association to set up the guidelines and expects them to be in place within 3 or 4 months. Chris Hipkins says it's the right step.
We don't want to be unreasonable either. There are rifle shooting clubs in secondary schools that are about target shooting that are very responsibly managed. It's a legitimate sport, and I wouldn't want to say that no young people shouldn't be able to do that, but the idea that they're having semi-automatic weapons in schools, that's just not appropriate at all.
The Defence Force turned down an interview request, but in a statement said the visit was approved by Whakaronga School and all participants were given a safety briefing. RNZ also asked the school's principal for comment, but he's yet to respond. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Ian Telfer looked at this earlier in the programme. We're going to sort of push into it a bit now in detail. A campaign to raise $20 million or thereabouts to keep production of some of Cadbury's famous treats in Dunedin, and the fact it is gaining momentum. The plan was only launched this morning by City Councillor Dr Jim O'Malley, who's been given a fortnight by Cadbury factory owner Mondelez to come up with funds to keep the production of Jaffas and pineapple lumps and so on in the city. Now, earlier today, Dr O'Malley said he was confident he could raise the funds. They had about $300,000 after only 4 hours. And I asked him what they're trying to buy.
What we're trying to buy, this will be an equity investment company in the end once we get to the next phase, is a series of pieces of equipment that allow us to make all the classic stuff that you buy at the supermarket, like pineapple lumps and Jaffas and all that sort of stuff. And in that, we'll have an ability to bid for what Mondelez is offering as their third-party manufacturing contracts, which is to manufacture all that stuff for them. If we get to that point, then we have basically one shift already financed and paid for by the contract that we get with Mondelez, and we capture all of the people in Dunedin who know, well, we capture critical people in Dunedin who know how to manufacture chocolate on an industrial scale. So this investment at its first part is about making sure that we don't lose this technology from Dunedin especially, but potentially even New Zealand in general in terms of where we want to go in the long run. And once we've got there, the other thing that we'll have is the ability to expand without any more capital investment into the 2 extra shifts that would be available on that equipment that we'd own. And that expansion is then how we grow into basically going back to what we've lost and really maintaining and building a factory in Dunedin of real substantial size.
So could you clarify this for me? And I'm a bit confused about this. You're not getting ownership of the brands. You're not getting Pineapple Lumps. You're not getting Jaffas. You're getting the right to be the contractor that keeps making them for Cadbury / Mondelez in Dunedin.
Yes, but we get the right, but we also own our own factory and we're allowed to make our own red lollies with a chocolate centre. We're just not allowed to call them Jaffas. So what we'll do is we'll work for Mondelez on that first shift, and that allows us to capture all the really important people that we need to capture. And then we go on to the next shift and we make a red lolly that we then sell overseas, and we own all that entirely ourselves. That's not in conflict with the relationship with Mondelez. In addition to which, if we make another lolly that's not in that list, we're not in competition with them either. So we're basically like anybody else who'd be going for this contract. It augments our underlying income base, but it doesn't restrict us from being something else as well. So we're using that to grow from and into something new.
And you think you've done the financials on this? You believe that you can make this work?
I have been given the preliminary numbers, and on that preliminary analysis, I think it will definitely work, and that we'll be able to give a dividend that would be comparable to having, say, your money in a long-term investment account.
So the people who are putting $50 in at the moment, or $200 or $500, and a lot of them will be doing so because they want to retain this in Dunedin, the work in Dunedin, the connection between Dunedin and these iconic products, and that's an overused word, but in confectionery terms they are. But what do they get?
Truly. They'll get a reasonable return on their money, so and then they do get exactly what you just described. I think that the person that we're targeting here is the person who cares about this factory, who cares about these products, and wants to make a statement with their investment that this actually matters. Because honestly, if we'd not put in the answer to the RFI last Friday, then come March, the production in Dunedin would have just stopped and the lights would have gone off, and that'll be the end of it. And we're about to hit the 150th anniversary of production of chocolate on that site. I think it would be a terrible tragedy on the 150th anniversary to turn the lights off. So what they get is to give us out to the 200-year mark. And that's a big part of, I think that's a reasonable reason to invest, to be honest.
Jim, so many jobs being lost. How many jobs do you think you will be able to retain if you win the right to do this?
At start, it's not that many. There's only 15 staff on one production shift, so it's only 15 production people and then 10 support staff. So 25 of the 300-odd jobs to start with. But when we get up to fully activating that line, we're about 64 jobs. So, you know, we're starting to get back up there. But then we also then look to expand back into the chocolate production. So the idea would be this is a company that would return a dividend to the investor, but really putting most of its money back into growth and expansion so that we can get back up to that size again. We have some very good contacts overseas. Dunedin's been pushing into the Chinese market area for a long time, and I've already got people saying that they think that there's markets there. So I think that we could be, I think we'll grow again. The issue really now is we want to make sure that we don't completely fall over, which is what will happen is if we don't get this off the ground now.
Dr. Jim O'Malley, who is behind this attempt to essentially crowdsource, although it's somewhat more sophisticated than that. They had about $300,000 pledged, not given, pledged when we spoke to him earlier today. It only started this morning. It is fascinating. We're trying to talk to Mondelez about what, in fact, they are offering the people who are giving expressions of interest to obtain access to the Cadbury facility in Dunedin. It's very difficult to get an interview with Mondelez, which is extraordinary because they're a huge company with a gigantic media department, but they're more silent than Marcel Marceau in our experience. Finally tonight, a Massachusetts woman is facing animal cruelty charges after overfeeding her pot-bellied pig. The pig, called Maybelle, weighs close to 90 kilos and has been seized by animal control, who've put her on a weight loss program so that she can walk again. This report from Reuters.
Even pigs can be overweight. Maybelle, a pot-bellied pig, is so fat she can't even walk or open her eyes.
It's not healthy for the pig. And as much as being underweight is a form of neglect and abuse, so is being this much overweight.
Maybelle should only weigh about 100 pounds, but her owner kept feeding her. Now she weighs twice as much. Caretakers at the Animal Rescue League in Boston are trying to feed her a healthier diet and get her to move more, which doesn't always make her happy.
I know, come on.
Maybelle's owner says she was holding the pig for a friend, but this is the third time animal control has removed a pig from her house. Now she faces animal cruelty charges.
Our main concern was making sure that she was going to lose enough weight and get her morale back, really.
Caretakers say it'll be weeks before Maybelle can lose enough weight to walk.
That report from Reuters, lots of feedback tonight, and it's come in quite sharply and suddenly after Karen Brown's mental health story. John, on behalf of a family struggling to manage mental health issues with a 20-year-old, I challenge the Minister's statement that money is not the biggest issue facing mental health. Why are there so few respite beds available in Auckland and even fewer supported accommodation options where families reach the point of being unable to manage? My guess would be because there's insufficient funding of such resources. That's from Joe, and Ian says perhaps Dr Coleman could talk to a selection of psych service nurses, i.e. the staff who are on the ground, to register just what the situation is from their perspective. Yes, we were talking to people in Christchurch last week, and the feedback they were giving us was quite different from what was being said in that parliamentary committee today. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate your company. We will be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 3 investigations are underway at Auckland Prison after potentially excessive force by staff after an assault last month was revealed on CCTV footage. The Social Development Ministry has been criticised for not following up a January alert to a security problem with its system for collecting people's data from community agencies. Guidelines are to be drawn up about allowing firearms in schools after the Defence Force let primary school children handle assault rifles. And the Health Minister has told a select committee that mental health requires not just more funding, but also new approaches focusing on social investment. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Every week, Insight is there, delving behind the headlines to find the stories that matter. Investigative, in-depth journalism that explores what's happening in New Zealand and to New Zealanders. You can subscribe to Insight for essential